Hi, everyone, and welcome to this online content for the week of October 18th and 20th in our healthcare ethics class. I'm recording this for all of you on Monday, October 17th. As I mentioned to you, and you obviously know, we don't have any class meetings this week. But there is some content and some class activities, so let me get right to it. What you'll see on the Blackboard site is a bunch of different things in addition to this recording. So a couple articles to read, not very long. The first article is a piece from a little over a year ago from the New York Times, really an opinion piece by Alicia Lombardini. And then there's a video to watch, an Instagram video of Alicia being interviewed as well. There is another very recent piece from Newsweek Global on our content topic, in vitro fertilization, from very short to read. And then there are a few other videos that I'd like you to watch. This is a little bit more local, fertility testimonies from actually some couples from the Women's Hospital here in Evansville. And then finally, there's some cases and class activities associated with this. So what I'd like to do, though, is sort of introduce the content for you. Just sort of give you a little bit of heads up here. So this is going to be our last week of talking about the beginning of life issues. And really the focus is going to be on in vitro fertilization and the ethics theme, which is this idea of pronatalism. So let me give you a little bit of a sense. We're not really going to debate the ethics about in vitro fertilization. I want to just describe it to you, but really have you dive into the content that I've presented to you, the articles, certainly the video, the stories, because you're going to hear Alicia's story, and then really hitting it close to home, two couples' local stories about some positive outcomes as well. So in vitro fertilization, or IVF, we start with a theme that we started with when we talked about abortion, fertilization, which is really the uniting of sperm and egg. The in vitro is a Latin term just meaning in a petri dish. It does not occur through sexual reproduction. It occurs in a lab. More so, it occurs in a test tube or a petri dish. So in vitro fertilization is a little over 50 years old. Now, the first in vitro fertilization baby was born a little over 50 years ago in England, but really it has just exponentially grown across the world, especially in the United States. IVF is really geared for individuals and couples who, for the most part, are not able to have children through sexual reproduction. There are certainly attempts made, there are tests made, but either there's some sort of medical issue that occur with either partners. Now, it has also been extended to single individuals, to LGBTQ individuals and couples as well. But the idea is that it happens, it's still fertilization, but obviously it is not able to occur for different reasons. And I'm going to use the term, it's not meant to be disrespectful, but is naturally, let's say through sexual reproductions, naturally will not occur, will not work, and so it has to occur in vitro. Because of this, and certainly the science has been expanding and getting better, there are barriers associated with this, but it is fueled by really our ethics theme. Now, the idea of pronatalism, and you can probably figure out that natal, meaning children, sort of family, the idea of pronatalism, the overwhelming the desire to have a child or children or a family. And we're very much, as a society, in favor of that. And certainly history tells us in this country and around the world that families needed to occur for survival, as well, certainly agriculturally, but also it was expected. Lineage moves on. And I always ask the question, in fact, I can't really ask this naturally because we're online. I don't know how many of you perhaps grew up in a family where it was always sort of expected, if you were of a certain age, or certainly if an individual was getting married or married for an amount of time, the next questions family members would ask was, when are there going to be kids coming? And maybe that is something that is naturally passed on. But the expectation then, because it certainly happens, quite frequently, as we've discussed, is people have kids. But for some individuals, that's just not possible. And yet the rest of our society moves ahead with it's wonderful. We celebrate when women in particular are pregnant, when couples are about to have, especially a first child. It is a big deal as well. And yet there's a part of our society, of every society, that is left out. So in vitro fertilization perhaps is the answer to that, but there are certainly steps involved. Now, it wasn't until, I'm going to say years ago, that I also asked a question in this class, IPH356. Does anyone know anyone who has gone through in vitro fertilization, or perhaps really is, again, the term is meant to be as respectful as possible, a child of in vitro fertilization? And then a couple of years ago, there was a student in the class who said, well, I was, conceived in a test tube. And it's certainly more common than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But let me talk about some of the processes, and you'll get a gist of it by listening to Alicia's story. So first of all, what we need is an egg and a sperm. And certainly that can come from, let's say, a man and a woman as well, or it can also come from donors. And this might be a little foreign, maybe a little science fiction-y to some of you as well. But again, the end product, the offspring, is still going to be, or the goal is to have an outcome, a positive outcome, a fetus, and ultimately a baby. It does exist a little bit differently in around the world, and so there are some barriers. First of all, it is very much an unregulated type of process. It is totally legal in the United States, in all 50 states. For the most part, health insurance does not cover IVF. Now, this is a big deal because the costs of in vitro fertilization can range between $15,000 and $30,000 a cycle. And it's probably easier for me to let Alicia talk about the cycle involved because she's experienced it and really went through a range of emotions, but then has a son as well. So there's certainly costs available, as we have previously discussed in some of our other content and topics, this naturally leaves individuals in our society out. And those are individuals who just can't afford IVF. So if you're not able to get pregnant or have a child naturally, and you're not able to cover the costs, and if insurance does not cover it, perhaps there's other options as well. There are certainly, I'm going to write over here, adoption is an option, is certainly an option for any individual or couple. There are numerous challenges to that and long steps in the United States, but it is certainly an option. Fostering, I'm writing pretty small, but I'm talking about it, is also an option, but there are no guarantees with fostering that you'll be able to adopt as well. But certainly every state and sometimes counties within states have different rules for fostering in particular. So there are other options, but I want to always go back to this, the overwhelming desire for individuals and couples to have a family. I'm not sure if we're born with that, but certainly our environment really encourages that as well. And we are around people who also view that as a positive thing. It actually doesn't matter what our culture is. It doesn't matter if we subscribe to a faith or not. Doesn't matter where we live. This is really seen as a positive type of thing. And so the challenges associated with IVF really are numerous because I'm going to write over here, since I'm really just trying to stick to one slide, success rates. I'm not even sure if I spelled that right. That's a C. Ultimately, what we see here is egg and sperm. And so what really the IVF process does is encourages, in a very simplistic way, lots of success, a higher success rate. So what you typically need is more eggs in the hope that one of them, this is my very crude drawing, will become fertilized, knowing that it is also natural for miscarriages to occur. And so the more eggs that you have, and eggs can only be harvested, at certain time periods, the more eggs that can be fertilized, the better. So perhaps the goal is to fertilize more, certainly many eggs, in the hopes that one of them will really carry to term. In knowing this, you also potentially risk having multiples, twins, triplets, maybe more. Some of you might be able to recall, I don't even know why I keep mentioning this. Maybe because it's so fascinating, Octomom, where a woman delivered 8 babies. 8 babies, 12 fertilized eggs were inserted, and 8 babies were born. Now, that was perhaps more of a Hollywood story in itself, but it brings up sort of the challenges with multiples, especially because with any type of multiples, there's higher risk for any type of medical issue, and almost always, in fact, I would say always, when it comes to in vitro fertilization, in addition to looking for successes, there's also perhaps costs, and those are emotional, medical, and financial costs in neonatal intensive care units. What I'm hoping to do is paint a picture that in a quest for pronatalism, what we have is a perfectly legal service here. It's not highly regulated in this country, as opposed to in other countries. In the United Kingdom, health insurance actually does pay for, I believe, one, maybe two, I think it's 2 cycles of in vitro fertilization for a woman in particular who is interested in going through that. Knowing that that right, essentially, even though there is a medical barrier to have a child naturally, that right should be available. I think I'm going to create another slide, if that's okay. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, hopefully you can still see that. What I'm going to ask you to do is look at all of the, first of all, read the articles, watch the Instagram video, Alicia's story, which is based on the article as well, the New York Times article. And then really your task for this week is to tackle both cases. And they're 2 different cases. They're actually real cases. And when we're back together again, I'm going to briefly go over the outcomes of both cases. But really, both cases, what you're tasked to do is put your own thoughts and a little bit more thought into the cases from an ethics perspective. Okay. So 2 cases, 2 class activities. It's really just going to be sort of joined into one. And really interested in you using the content, using content from this week, whether it be readings, articles, this YouTube video, incorporating those into both cases in some fashion. So let me go over the cases just briefly. So you can see those. And so what we have is a case of a couple, again, undergoing IVF. And then the second case is another couple who have been successful through IVF, but then are asked to make a pretty intense discussion, a pretty, they have a pretty big decision in front of them. So I'm going to stop and go back to, actually, I'm not going to go back to anything right now. So let me close by saying, again, I want you to focus not only on the readings and the Instagram videos, but really the output of this is in the 2 cases, and to really think about these 2 cases to develop an informed argument as well. And so, you know, the components you're wanting to put an ethics theme in there. This is not meant to, you're not bringing yourself into this at all. You want to have examples. Those examples should come from the content that we have talked about as well. But you want to see and focus on the ethics cases and really give a shot at these arguments. Okay. So I'm going to let you go, folks. Thanks very much. Really appreciate your patience with my absence this week. We'll get back to it the next week then. And last thing is, both of the case studies are due by the end of the day Friday, certainly by the end of the day. I'm not going to start really looking at them until the weekend when I get back. Okay. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye.